live up to that introduction. Okay. First of all, I want you to all understand that I didn't do all those things she listed all at the same time. That I started on this in 1970, so that's more than 45 years ago. And these things have taken place, you know, over a period of time. I want to start with a story. I was a little girl in New York, and my parents had put me in a little private school there. And my father got on the phone to other parents. It was during the early parts of World War II. And the school was having trouble with its enrollment, and it had a mortgage, and the management was worried. And so my father got on the phone, and I would hear him. He was a lawyer whose special interest was real estate. And he would be calling up parents from the school and badgering, cajoling, shaming, and being sweet about making sure that everyone put in those days it was just a few $100s, but you know, those figures of course have climbed, that they would put in a few $100s to pay off the school's mortgage. And I listened to him. I mean, you know, his office was in our home, so I would, you know, I'd wander in and hear him. I'd think, you know, he was really special that he would do that and go to the other parents and ask. I was about 9 years old. And that stuck with me a lot. I went eventually to Oberlin College. And Oberlin College, when I got there, its mantra was learning and labor. And they made it very plain that it was not that you were going to be somebody, but you were going to do something. And that was really important. I came back to New York, met my husband, who was a psychiatrist, and he was caught up in the Korean War doctor's draft. And we were lucky enough to be sent to the Bay Area. We were sent to Parks Air Force Base in Livermore. And I could not believe how beautiful this place was. I mean, just you know, landed here on a January afternoon, and I looked around and saw the bay and hills, and oh my goodness, I was just blown away. We stayed on afterwards, and I mean, he had 2 years of service here out of Parks Air Force Base, but we stayed on. And I went to graduate school at the California College of Arts and Crafts, now known as California College for the Arts. And I got a master's degree in printmaking and a teacher's credential. And some of that figures in what I'm saying to you, because that kind of personal satisfaction, whether teaching my family members some aspect of arts and crafts, or what has given me great pleasure, especially when the park work finally was not so intense as it was in its earliest days, it gave me the chance to work on my own pictures. And right now, I've told Sue there's an exhibit of 12 of my pictures at Fort Mason Center, but you have to do that as a field trip because it's in a lobby of the auditorium of Cowell Theater. So just, she may be working that out for you. To go back to coming here and having children, and my husband, being a psychiatrist, was rather an inward person, and I thought what I really need is a little community project. And so I went out looking for one. And after examining, I went to a neighborhood meeting that was put on by SPUR, San Francisco Planning and Urban Research Association, and I went to a Sierra Club meeting, and what I learned about was a plan to build a huge archives building between the Palace of the Legion of Honor and the Fort Miley VA Hospital. It was a 12.5-acre strip of land, East Fort Miley, and that was supposed to hold the archives, which I will say right away, with not very much effort and the total cooperation of both the Republican congressman of the district, Bill Meyer, and the Democratic congressman of the next district, Philip Burton, was sent down to San Bruno, or if you ever happen to go past it on highway, the connecting highway between 380 and 280, it's huge, and it would have been a monster, and it wasn't something that should go in that corner of that city. So from that, beginning on that, well, it was a bit of a negative campaign to begin with. It didn't last that long. I mean, the congressmen were, because they knew something, and I picked it up at Spur, that this was going to be part of a national park. And they were planning national parks in urban areas around the country. Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, Cuyahoga Valley in Ohio, and Gateway in New York, which came into existence the same day we did on October 27th, 1972. This whole campaign was unbelievable, and there were a couple of things you have to know about it. One was the people in this area had appreciated what they had and still have in terms of the natural environment, and they had gotten started on it in 1870. Golden Gate Park, for example, was 1872. And, you know, plazas and parks were set aside in the earliest plans for San Francisco. Well, I came along 100 years later, and I sometimes joke with people that all I did was connect the dots, because what we had in the city, on the coast, which needed more protection and was really more of national significance. Going over into Marin, we had the Marin Headlands forts, and the Army was thinking of cutting them up and selling them off. And going further north, Point Reyes National Seashore had already been established in 1962. All we had to do was just run this up the Olima Valley and connect it sort of jump over Mount Tamalpais State Park, which is still a state park, but it's in our boundary in case they ever want to give it to us. And so was Angel Island. We ran all the way up to Point Reyes' doorstep. Today, the park has 80,000 acres. I have to put this against another aspect of, you know, my background. When I was a kid, we went to the country in the summertime. My father and his brother had bought 50 acres near Peekskill, New York, and they were, you know, planning to build some houses. And meanwhile, you know, there was open land. There had been a lodge there, and the lodge had burned. And so there was some open area that was a playing field, and there was 1,000 feet of lakefront and a warm water lake. This to me was heaven. And then I got to be a teenager, and, you know, my parents did look at this and say, this was, you know, no longer a place, we weren't little kids anymore. And the only real sports in the area was the bar down the road. That didn't work out. And we didn't own horses, and we didn't have any, you know, you could take a boat on the lake, but it became that my parents wanted to travel, and so they said, you know, this is going to go. And, you know, I was a young teenager when they said it's time for you to go to camp, and then after that there were other things, and I lost my land. And I have heard one parallel story. Some of you may know Marty Griffin, who's a retired doctor. He's 95. And Marty Griffin was one of the founders of Audubon Canyon Ranch, in addition to doing a lot of other things. And Marty once told me that's what happened to him. His family owned land in California. He was from here, and he lost his land. He lost what was, you know, the family land. And that stuck with me. So when I stumbled into this project at Fort Miley, it was like, oh, I understand this. My father didn't live to see it. He had 50 acres. I had 80,000. And everybody is there. It's there for all of you to enjoy permanently. Now, the campaign for this is what I really want to talk about in terms of living well, aging well. This was the most collaborative of meaningful activities one could possibly have had. When I started on this, I was so proud of my electric typewriter. We did not have computers. We used the Spur mimeograph machine for our newsletters until, what do you know, the Marin County chairman of our group, People for a Golden Gate National Recreation Area, said, I work for PG&E PG&E, and I have a little pull. From then on, our green newsletters, the Pifkenera Greenbelt Gazette, was printed not with their knowledge, the PG&E. But this was the spirit that infused this campaign. And the idea of getting engaged with something that's larger than yourself, something you can collaborate in, and you know, and everybody did, you know, what they could. For example, as I said, you know, we had no computers, and I was not the world's greatest typist, particularly when you needed, you know, 4 carbon copies. So we had women on the block, and at the next block, who said, "Fine, just give us, you know, the typing. We'll take care of it." And when we had to raise money, because you have to have, at that time, an answering service, and you had stationery, and you had, you know, certain things at certain costs, and I needed help, and the Sierra Club gave me the help of a woman, her name is the same today, Mia Monroe. Have any of you run into her? She's at Park Service now. She was a college student, and the Sierra Club sent her. And she helped, so we had to raise a little money. And anyway, we figured at the end of this campaign, our park had cost 58 cents an acre. In other words, when we started, the first round was 34,000 acres. And I remember Jerry Adams, so some of you may remember, as a reporter for the Examiner. Jerry came over to me at the celebration for the signing of the bill by President, and he said, "Amy, I always thought you were a nice lady." He said, "I also thought you were crazy." So just get some sense of this. We were, I would add, we were not experienced. There was a handful of us in the Richmond who got organized, like a handful, like, that's it, to start this. And Ed Waverly lived a few blocks away from us, and so he knew how to organize a campaign. He was working on Alaska and redwoods along with this, but he knew the congressman knew him. I didn't know any congressman. But I, for example, found out that Kimmy Burton, who was the daughter of John Burton, was in my younger daughter's class in nursery school. And her mother came to pick her up, and you know, she would be there, and I'd say, "How do I get to Phil Burton's office?" She said, "You wait until Bill Thomas, one of his aides, is there. He will understand what you're talking about." And it's the kind of cooperative network making, and it's fun. It's an incredible amount of fun to feel that you're part of a project that's larger than yourself. And that's what I do. I mean, and that's what the campaign, we had, the first 2 years were 1972, there was an edition in 1974. We bombed in 1976. This is by congressional sessions. You have to get each of these even-numbered years for a reason. We had a pretty good idea of taking a good chunk of San Mateo County. And San Mateo County actually had a group, mostly of real estate people, who said, "We're forming people against a Golden Gate National Recreation Area." So that had to wait a few years, but we've got a nice chunk of land down there above Pacifica, and because one of Phil Burton's aides was very astute, they put the whole of the San Francisco watershed lands in San Mateo County into the park, even though it's a San Francisco piece of land. It's a boundary, but what do you know? We've had mayors who come into office who could have said, "Well, if we just sell off a few hundred acres of those 20,000, you know, we could do that, and we could do that, and we could do that again, can't sell it." So that's how, you know, there are all kinds of things that you learn along the way, and I've had a blast.